slowly returning to your seats. Also, on my behalf, we probably should be welcoming people for today, but I also want to welcome you here and thank you for being present. My name is Hugo. I am affiliated as an anthropologist to the African Studies Department at Ghent University, and part of the organizing committee together with Lily and the rest. You will get to know us over the next couple of days. This panel has been entitled Negotiating Return and has two speakers. It had three speakers, Alman and Kela, who, as Eileen pointed out, unfortunately cannot make it to the conference, but she's with us in spirit. And Claude Malitano of DRC, this thing is making noise, isn't it? Also couldn't make it, but we are fortunate to have Maarten Couttenier of the World Museum for Central Africa, who's here, who's going to read Jean-Claude's paper. The first speaker is Lars Müller of the Landesmuseum in Hannover, with a paper negotiating the German position, debates about postcolonial restitution in the 1970s and early 1980s. And Lars, as far as I am aware of, is specifically, well, as one of his hats that he's wearing at the museum, is specifically working on a project around provenance research. We've already talked about it, arguably, and when you ask me personally, maybe the most important job and the long overdue job that museums that hold these kinds of collections, these world collections, should be looking at. So without much further ado, I would like to open the floor for Lars, and then after that we will have Maarten speaking on behalf of Jean-Claude Malitano.
Thanks for the introduction. In the current debate on restitution in post-colonial contexts, it's usually overlooked that countries of origin face demands for the return of objects at an earlier period of time. Questions whether and under what circumstances museums should return objects were intensely discussed in the last decades. If you take a closer look to the German museums, 1973 was a turning point. In this year, the president of Zaire, Mobutu Sese Seko, called for the return of works of art from exploited countries at the UN General Assembly, as well as at the Congress at the International Association for Art Critics in Kinshasa. He triggered a transnational debate about the question how to deal with these objects in the future. In the following minutes, I will ask how German museums and collections deal with these questions, and I will do that in two steps. In the first part of the paper, I analyze how various actors tried to reach an agreement on a common German position. One interesting point in the demands from the year was that German actors felt forced to negotiate common positions. This were at least for two reasons. First, on an international level, there were mainly in the UN and UNESCO expert meetings, the establishment of an intergovernmental committee, and finally the development of guidelines for request for return or restitution of cultural objects in 1983. It was important for the German government to develop a position on these questions and to enforce that on an international level, or at least to prevent opposing views. Second, the museum collection faced demands, requests, or statements of interest in the following years. And the collection were unsecure how to deal with it. Against the background of the transnational debate, the second part of the paper examines how selected restitution claims and requests were discussed on the level of the collections. To show the spectrum of the debate, I will present three case studies. None of these early case studies ended in real negotiations or even in restitution, but despite a defensive discourse on the German side, extensive debates and exchange of arguments took place on a practical level. I will argue in the following paper that it is important for the discourse nowadays to take a closer look to the debates in the last decades. It is not only important to recognize that there was a defensive position on the German side, but to analyze the arguments why the museums and collections did not agree to give back objects or even try to negotiate how to deal with these objects in future. The fundamental problem in understanding German debates about culture or in the field of culture is the federal structure of Germany. If we talk about these topics, we have to keep in mind that the federal states, the Association of Cities and Towns, the Standing Commission of Ministers for Education and Culture, the KAMK, and the Foundation of Prussian Cultural Heritage, the SPK, were main actors and current owners of these objects. To make the matter even more complicated, it was an internationally discussed topic that touched national interest. For this reason, the Foreign Office, the German Museum Commission, and the Minister of Interior were main actors. On the level of the museums and collections, I will focus on the Landesmuseum in Stuttgart, the Frobenius Institute in Frankfurt, the Ethnographical Museum in Berlin, and the Ethnographical Collection at the University in Göttingen, where I did extensive archival research. Next to that, we have to mention the German Museums Association as well as the German Icon Commission, who were actively part of the debates. You see, it was quite complicated. However, it would be premature to see these three categories as opposing actors. Rather, one has to keep in mind that all these actors have different perspectives on the topics. Furthermore, one has to recognize that there was an intensive debate and exchange of arguments between these actors. And additionally, we have to keep in mind that several persons were active in for different institutions. For example, àFaradje was director of the Frobenius Institute. He was also part in the international expert meetings of UNESCO on behalf of the Foreign Office, and he was member of the UNESCO Commission as well as in the relevant committee of the KAMK. But let's take a closer look to the early debates in the 70s. The starting point, as I said, was 1973. Following Mobutu's speech, the Foreign Office wrote to the KAMK, in order not to have to decide under time pressure, we should consider at an early stage what position the delegation of the Federal Republic of Germany intends to adopt in the dispute and what argumentation to use. The KAMK was responsible for a summarizing report on the question of restitution of art objects from developing countries. And it was Friedrich Kussmaul who wrote an extensive statement. Here he argued first of all that we cannot speak about a robbery, because first we were talking about everyday objects that were collected and that could be easily produced. Second, these often consist of easy perishable materials that were saved by collecting. Third, often these objects were actively offered for sale or exchange in addition. Since the sell-out in the postcolonial times were much more serious than in colonial times. So that means in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, much more objects left the region than during the colonial times. He continued that the situation in the countries of origin swing between two positions. On one hand, the objects has more or less no meaning in a modernized culture, and on the other hand, that African politicians try to use these objects to revive culture and to talk about dignity, achievements, and tradition in these countries. He also mentioned that museums for conversation would not exist in these countries, in contrast to the efficient institutions, for example, in Germany. He summarized that a rightful claim for restitution would not exist, and he continued that no moral obligation exists either. I cited it was the Europeans who acquired most recent pieces from local who were willing to give them in our collections, where they were safe from decay and have since fulfilled and still fulfill important function. It becomes clear that most developing countries are doing themselves a great disservice if they let the existing collection to be torn apart, thereby destroying the most important witness of their cultures and the most important ambassadors of their countries. But Kussmaul went even further by sketching out instructions for actions. The countries of origin should draw up a list of national property course with the help of the Europeans, in order to protect these objects. Second, certificates should be issued for tradable objects. Third, experts must be trained in these countries, and again, of course, with the help of the European institutions. And he added, fourth, if there were no longer enough objects on site to represent a culture in a representative way, necessary objects from Europe could be handed over in a goodwill campaign. It is noteworthy that Cosmo on one hand had an extremely negative stance, but on the other hand he advocated cooperation that would also be helpful for his institution. Let's take a look. This idea to help these institutions was quite popular in the German side. So different institution, organization issued papers about that, so the German Icon Commission as well as the Museums Association. Let's go to the international negotiations. In 1976, for the first time, a meeting of experts was convened by UNESCO to discuss the next steps. From the German side, Gansemeyer, director of the Überseemuseum, took part. He was there as a representative of ICOM, and he stressed that he was invited as an independent expert. Nevertheless, he reported to the German institutions. For Germany, the meeting did not go as planned. On one hand, the experts suggested setting up an international body to negotiate institutions. On the other hand, Gansemeyer was misquoted in an interview, giving the impression that he wanted actively to promote institutions. Gansemeyer's position was much more complicated. He argued that a fundamentally negative position would poison the climate between the so-called Third World and Europe, and he showed a fundamental understanding of the demands. But that does not mean that he was in favor for restitutions. In the next meetings, for example in Dakar, 1978, when the Foreign Office were able to send a person, they sent Haberland from the Frobenius Institute, not Gansemeyer. This meeting agreed on statutes for an intergovernmental committee. Before the meeting, there was strong discussion on the German side. It was advocated that this committee should not be equipped with competences and could only be as an intermediate actor between the so-called Third World and Germany or other European countries. The meeting of the committee was a turning point in the discussion. Clausewitz, from the chairman of the German Museums Association, said in 1976 that the requested returns and exchange were an extremely dangerous affair, the possible consequences of which many colleagues do not seem to be aware of. He expressed concern about the possible consequences. After the committee was set and the rules were in place, the German ministries had a conversation and they stated clearly that the consequences are partly overestimated from the German museums directors, so there was some kind of relief on the German side. In the following years, the committee was established, a questionnaire was developed, and even guidelines for the use for the standard form concerning requests for return or restitution were established by the committee in 1983. During all this time, German actors continued to try to smooth the rules for the restitution on the international level, so that largely non-binding rules were set. At the same time, however, there was a dialogue between the German collections that they should not fundamentally oppose the demanding countries. German, as I said before, tried to develop a project to educate museum staff in the so-called developing countries, always keeping in mind that this was also helpful for German institutions. I would like to argue the following, that the willingness to return object is also a test if one is really interested in an open dialogue or not, or in maybe even in cooperation. Therefore, I would like to focus on 3 restitution demands at that time. The first case study from Tanzania and the Landesmuseum. In the early 1980s, Dr. Wahn, director of the Antiquities Archives in Tanzania, expressed a special interest for a collection in the Landesmuseum. He asked for a list of objects. The director, Kusmal, wrote in consultation with the Ministry of Culture that this was possibly the first case of a return claim. He therefore compiled only the most necessary information. Vane, however, wrote, "We would like to emphasize that the collection is one of the utmost national interest in our cultural heritage." He was planning a visit, but he needed financial support. Kusmal was skeptical about that. He first asked the Museum's Administration Board, they instructed him to contact the Foreign Ministry, which Kusmal did, but in a very negative tone. He wrote that the collection was legally required and stated that Tanzania would remember the pieces only because of the recent publication of the Landesmuseum and would thus have got an appetite for a return. And therefore would now inquire if we would make a business trip easy for them. The Federal Foreign Office refused to finance this contact or this business trip. Kusmal described the strategy to a letter to the German embassy in Tanzania as follows: gentle in manner and firm in action. He tried to seem to be helpful and open, but he made no real effort to enter into a dialogue. Especially against the background of Kusmal's role in the public debate, one has to ask why that was the case. And I would like to highlight 3 points. First, he was seriously convinced that this object has been acquired legally, and that was the most important reason for him. Secondly, he was seriously convinced that the object has been acquired, that objects, if they were returned to these countries, would end up on the art market, and he was not in favor for that. Several letters stressed this point. And third, Tanzania was one of the first projects where they did a project of cultural aid. And so they invited staff members from the Tanzanian Museum to Cologne to train them, and in return, one staff member of the museum in Cologne spent 9 months in the Tanzanian National Museum. Kusmal read the final report of this project, and it stated clearly that the program had not the desired outcome. Above all, the museum in Tanzania would not support any of these corporations, and the material for restoration were not available. Therefore, it clearly recommended that no returns should be made in the foreseeable future. The next case, I will do that quite quickly. In 1976, the organization Representation de la Fédération Shoah contacted that of the ethnographic collection at the University of Göttingen. They tried to build up a museum of their culture, and they were looking for some sansas, so-called schwankenheads. They do not have any in their collections. The interesting thing that they didn't just ask for a return, but they offered an exchange. So they offered to make some sansas from animals, not from humans. The collection was quite surprised by the request, and it took some time how to deal with that. They forwarded the request via the universities to the UNESCO Commission, and then they answered that due to the negotiation on an international level, they were not allowed to negotiate directly with the Shoah. Overall, to that there was a problem that the university did not really know much about these specialty collections, and they tried to gather some information, and they learned that the request was just from a branch office and not from the headquarters of the Shoah, and they internally asked who could validly claim the sansas, and it was agreed on the German side that it was not the Shoah, because they made these heads from the enemies, and so if we have to return something, they had to search for the enemies of the Shoah where they took the head before they made it into the sansa. That was not the end of the story, because someone on the German side came to another conclusion. So the head was stolen in December 1977 and was sent per post to Ecuador to the sansa. So there was some kind of restitution. The next case study is Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka and collection Berlin. The interesting case here is that Sri Lanka addressed the UNESCO, or more specific, the International Intergovernmental Committee, to help them with the repatriation of some material or objects. It is important to mention that they had quite detailed information about collections in Germany, like in the Tanzanian case. Here it was quite complicated because they addressed the UNESCO contacts the Foreign Office contacts the museum, and the museum never get into contact with some people from Sri Lanka. And also in this case, no restitution take place, and they just changed it into some, they conducted some bilateral talks, and they talked about how you could help to build a museum there. To come to the conclusion quickly, so I shortened that part a bit. I would like to summarize the paper in 4 points. In the 1970s and 80s, there was an intensive debate about restitution, also often beyond the public sphere. And even if the debate did not lead to restitution, it is worth to analyze them, since the conclusion that Germany or the German museums director rejected restitution in principle would be too easy. First, it must be noted that there was no structure how these demands were to be introduced, and that there was a great deal of uncertainty on the German side. You can see that in the Göttingen case, they didn't want to talk with the Schur directly, and they said there were international talks, so they tried to put it away from themselves. And even after the Intergovernmental Committee was in place, it was too weak to really promote the process. Second, on the German side, the other side must be involved. I couldn't do that in this talk, but it is clear that the other side did not possess sufficient information to make real demands. So they needed to make a dialogue and to be in contact with the German side because they really could demand something. That is particularly the case in the in the Stuttgart Tanzania case, but also in the case from Sri Lanka. They had quite a lot of information, but they couldn't really demand the objects because they had not the competence about the structure and the objects. Thirdly, the two sides talked cross-purpose. While the claimants referred to cultural heritage, the German side spoke about legal situation and legal claims. Only a few actors on the German side initially acknowledged the demands for return of culturally important objects before attempting to initiate a dialogue on how to proceed. Fourth, from today's perspective, it is not surprising that the returns did not come about, but rather that the dialogue did not come about. This was a wish from both sides, especially from the German side. It was not just an evasive maneuver that they tried to talk about cultural aid, but they really developed plans how to work together, but it not really came into place. Finally, I would like to come back to Kusmal, who was very defensive in the demands. 1985, when the debate in Germany ended or slowed down, he wrote in a letter that the subject became maybe another topic in the year 2000, but not before. He wasn't right about the time frame. It took even longer to debate that again. But it still remains open what would happen if in the 70s and 80s at least a dialogue about the future of this object had been started. So thanks for your attention.
Hello, my name is Maarten Couttenier. I'm from the African Museum in Tervuren. I'm here to replace Claude Malitano, who couldn't come to the conference unfortunately due to visa problems, which also is important to note that all these practical issues complicate matters, which is in the program, as I've said. This paper I'm presenting is the result of a research project called Congo Connect, which was a project of Ghent University, African Museum Tervuren and KASK here in Ghent. And in Tervuren, Hannelore van den Bergen did research in northeast Congo, in àFaradje, where Jean-Claude runs an NGO called APRO. Hannelore couldn't make it also, she's in maternity leave, so I'm here to replace two people. So I first would like to present the paper of Jean-Claude, which will take about 10 minutes, and then I will add some remarks, which will also take 10 minutes. The paper of Jean-Claude is in French, my contribution will be in English. So the title of this presentation of Jean-Claude, so I'm Jean-Claude, Restitution des collections coloniales en Europe, possibilités, défis, dilemmes, restitution de connaissances àFaradje, Haut-Uélé, RDC, à partir des photographes historiques dans le Musée Royale de l'Afrique centrale. Donc il présente différents points dans son communication, introduction, la recherche de l'étudiante-chercheuse de MRAC, donc ça c'est Hannelore van den Bergen, la retombée dans la recherche, les objectifs de la communication et la conclusion. Donc je commence avec l'introduction. Action pour la promotion rurale, APRO, est une organisation non gouvernementale locale basée en territoire de àFaradje dans la province de Haut-Uélé depuis 2001. Elle s'occupe de l'accompagnement de la communauté dans la résolution de leurs problèmes socioculturels, des femmes et enfants nés de violences de Lord's Resistance Army de Joseph Kony, LRA, dont de la résolution pacifique des conflits qui opposent les éleveurs Peuls appelés Mbororo et la communauté locale, accompagnement de la communauté dans la protection de l'environnement, de la médiation de conflits entre la société civile et le parc national de Garamba, du monitoring des droits des personnes déplacées et des violations des droits humains dans les concessions des entreprises minières. Donc il y a différents objectifs. En plus, APRO joue un rôle dans la société comme médiateur culturel, comme par exemple médiateur pour la reconstruction du marché ou comme plateforme logistique diverses chercheurs et organisations comme Pax Pays-Bas, DAG, UNHCR, NBO, Botro, etc. Cette présentation se réfère dans la recherche qui a mené l'étudiante Hannelore van den Bergen du 13 juillet au 20 septembre 2017 en territoire de àFaradje sur les œuvres d'art historiques et l'histoire du chef Logo au Gambie appelé Marocain de l'époque coloniale. Sur terrain, àFaradje, Hannelore a eu à rencontrer le petit-fils propre de l'ancien chef coutumier marocain, dans la personne de chef Jean Obote Siraka. Via la comparaison des histoires trouvées dans les archives coloniales et histoires orales, nous avons pu co-créer les histoires de notre chef marocain. On voit quelques-unes des coutumes dans les photos historiques. La recherche en question a relevé l'importance des danses folkloriques de àFaradje, que la génération marocaine exhibait et que la génération actuelle a partiellement perdu contact. À cela s'ajoute le rajeunissement du pouvoir coutumier dans le Haut-Uélé. La politisation du pouvoir coutumier, donc la disparition de l'association des chefs coutumiers de Haut-Uélé après le départ des chefs dirigeants au Parlement provincial et national. Après plusieurs séances de présentation au public pendant ces recherches, des photos d'œuvres d'art qu'elle avait ramenées du musée des arts aux chefs coutumiers, aux élèves des écoles primaires et secondaires, aux étudiants de l'Institut supérieur d'àFaradje, aux associations paysannes. Aujourd'hui, il y a des personnes qui passent au bureau pour demander s'ils pourront consulter ces photos d'œuvres d'art. Donc, ce sont les membres d'APERO, Hannelore et en bas à gauche, et Wander est à droite. Ça, c'est dans le centre de l'APERO. Tu vois les photos du musée à droite, des focus groups, des petites exhibitions, des photos àFaradje. La recherche que nous avons menée avec Hannelore a été très importante pour notre organisation, en particulier et pour la population locale d'àFaradje en général. Car cela avait rencontré ce que APRO réalisait depuis 2008 avec la population locale dans le cadre de non-répétition, non-oubli du passé et du devoir de mémoire en rapport avec les milliers de victimes du massacre de LRA de Joseph Kony, dont la récolte des objets ayant servi au massacre, le témoignage des victimes et des témoins qui sera déposé aux autorités congolaises et à la CPI afin de réclamer la justice et construction du monument en mémoire des victimes. Massacre qui avait fait plus de 1700 morts en territoire d'àFaradje, Dungu et Niangara, du 13 à 15 décembre 2018, APRO et le gouvernement provincial, avec l'appui financier de Pax Pays-Bas, a organisé le 10e anniversaire de ces massacres à LRA àFaradje. Une conférence régionale des pays affectés, Soudan du Sud, RCA, Ouganda et RDC, qui aboutit à la mise sur pied d'un réseau régional d'encouragement et la défection au sein de la LRA à travers les messages radio et tracts. Actuellement, APRO prend en charge plus de 50 enfants ex-combattants de LRA. Cette recherche àFaradje nous a permis de découvrir plus sur l'histoire de nos anciens chefs coutumiers à l'époque coloniale, leur administration, leur organisation militaire. Donc différentes photos du monument qui est récemment établi à àFaradje. Étant donné que plusieurs photos ramenées de MRAC portaient des noms en langue locale, Logoti, Baka, Avokaya et Mondo, respectivement des grandes tribus du territoire d'àFaradje dont les chefs coutumiers avaient posé beaucoup de résistance aux colonisateurs, avec leur tradition en voie de disparition et notre infusance de compétences d'organisation d'un centre culturel. Cela m'a poussé à ouvrir le centre d'apprentissage en langue locale avec différents objectifs. Apprentissage des langues locales, par exemple le Logoti, apprentissage et valorisation des danses folkloriques, collection des objets d'art, initiation de la jeunesse à la production des œuvres d'art locales et vulgarisation de la culture logo en général en voie de disparition. Quelques photos de ces apprentissages. les différentes tâches de APRO. Voyons l'impact du travail que notre ONG avait abattu ensemble avec Hannover et les installations des photos historiques qu'elle avait obtenues pour nous du musée Tervuren. Cela nécessitait un suivi permanent et durable. Ma présentation pour TAPAS veut interroger des possibilités et des limitations possibles de la coopération depuis les plateformes APRO et avec le chef coutumier pour la restitution des connaissances entre àFaradje et MRAC. En bref, quelle ligne est-il possible de créer avec le musée et comment? Nous venions également de soumettre une lettre au directeur général du MRAC au mois de septembre 2019 pour poursuivre notre contact, pour accéder à nos photos ancestrales afin d'apprendre aux générations actuelles et futures nos valeurs ancestrales et culturelles. À partir de mon expertise dans la province de Haut-Uélé, j'avais quelques suggestions à faire dans ma communication par rapport à cet centre àFaradje qui m'a permis de découvrir plus sur l'histoire culturelle de nos anciens chefs coutumiers de l'époque coloniale, leur administration, organisation militaire, leur engagement vis-à-vis de la protection de leur espace vital avec leur population, etc. Voyons l'impact de travail qu'APRO avait abattu ensemble avec le MRAC à travers cette chose, les informations et les photos historiques qu'elle avait obtenues pour nous du musée. Cela nécessite un suivi permanent à long terme par différentes points. Donc, accès à la base de données du musée pour voir les photos d'àFaradje et en construction et équipement d'un centre culturel àFaradje, mise en place d'un cadre de coopération entre le musée et le centre culturel d'àFaradje, envoi des linguistes locaux d'àFaradje en stage au musée pour redynamiser le centre culturel d'àFaradje, envoi des experts du musée au centre culturel d'àFaradje pour organisation et renforcement des capacités et vice-versa pour les collections locaux Mundo, Baka, Zande, rapprocher la province de Haut-Uélé de la Belgique. Merci. Donc encore une image pour visualiser les demandes d'àFaradje et quelques photos du centre culturel qui... Donc on voit déjà le monument, mais on a des plans additionnels pour créer àFaradje. Mais donc avec un coût, évidemment. So what we have seen here is that there are a lot of plans in àFaradje and interviewing, but there are also a lot of problems. First problem, I already mentioned, is visa. And the distance between Congo and Belgium. We tried at the museum to bridge that gap, for example by the Congo Connect project between Ghent and Tervuren. And what you see here is a Belgian project that has resulted in visual restitution during fieldwork and examples of co-creation. It's a term that Jean-Claude used in Congo with APO. So we see that Hannover used oral tradition in combination with written historical material kept in Tervuren, archives, photographs and collections. So you need to master a lot of disciplines before you can really start. And I think this is a good practice of an encounter between two parties that can result in very valuable results. This can include physical restitution of collections, but also can result in local exhibitions, as we have seen. It can result in research, It can result in the demands of consultation and the demands of financial help in constructing monuments and cultural centers to facilitate cooperation in Congo, which is very important, I think. Which is so the creation of this research center in Congo is very important, and then we have 2 temples and to create a forum together, and then you can travel from Congo to Belgium and Belgium to Congo to allow contact, people meeting each other in the contact zone, which is very important, to allow a transfer of knowledge. This research project, Congo Connect, fits within research at Vuren since, let's say, the year 2000, on photography, ethnographic collections and physical remains. This has resulted in numerous publications and exhibitions like Exit Congo Museum, Colonial Times, The Exotic Man, which was here in Ghent Museum, Congo Far West, which was in Tervuren and in Lubumbashi, and Congo Across the Waters, for example, which was organized by Anton here present. So this is all in the past. We also are looking to the future with other projects like FET-Twin, projects on provenance research, and a Belspro project, Home, which is coordinated by Patrick Semal, also in the public here, on my right, so on your left. Home stands for Human Remains Origins, Multidisciplinary Evaluation. So this is on a new project, which hopefully will be approved on physical remains. So I've already talked about problems. So all these projects also, of course, demand a lot of money. I think in Belgium we are really at the beginning of a process and a debate, and I think we can learn a lot from Canada, United States, New Zealand, and other countries that already have been mentioned, where colonizers and colonized people live together within one border, and so there we don't have problems with visa. And the debate there is 50 years ahead of here. There are numerous publications, there are laws, there are good practices, and I think we really ought to look at the United States and Canada and New Zealand to inform ourselves to speed up the process here in Europe. As for Belgium, the debate comes very, very late, so this process only started in 2018, not by scientific research, I must stress, but by articles by Michel Bouffiou in Paris Match. And so this is last year, so a lot of work still has to be done. We really need structural finances to do provenance research in Belgium and other European museums. I'm now working, for example, on an article on the history of the world exhibitions in Antwerp in 1885 and 1894 with the Museum in Antwerp. And there you see that collections from Belgium traveled to Berlin and Leiden. So I did research in Tervuren, Antwerp, Berlin, Leiden, which takes a very, very long time. And then you get new facts, but also new questions. Provenance research can lead to success, but these are almost exceptions. Most of the time, you're looking at objects that have been lost during the world wars in Europe, or have been eaten by museums and are now globbed by museums in their cellars. And what's left is this administration about the collection, so you have these records that are copied, and in the end there's nothing left. And James Clifford recently associated these basements and these records with historical injustice. Hence the importance of curators doing fieldwork in Congo and Congolese experts to come to Belgium and Europe, because Congolese experts, of course, the main experts of their own culture. So these exchanges can only these exchanges can lead to important insights that can be used in European and African museums. And I've already mentioned the important concept of James Clifford's contact zone, which he explains in Roots and Returns. And in these contact zones you can create co-curation like Jean-Claude did with Hannover. And I think in contrast that in Belgium we still operate in a rift zone that separates people. There's no communication, very little. And we still have a long way to go before administration and tutelage can be replaced by reciprocity and dialogue. And I would like to close my contribution by a statement of Brioni Onsiul in a very good article in a recent book, Curatopia, very good title, and she explains that this co-curation can only be realized by very important notions like respect, trust, humility, and humor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot both for quite different but also same kind of papers and raising different issues, I think quite thought-provoking. So I would like to open the floor for questions. Maybe if it's doable, we will have this done one by one. We'll see how far we go, but so that we can focus. I'll try that. And I have assistance. I really don't mind if I have to. There was, yeah, there's one over there.
Thank you. Hi, I think I can talk loudly then. Thank you so much for your talks. I have two questions for Lars. And first question would be if you could say something about the reactions and positions of Eastern German museums and Eastern German political figures concerning the restitution debate. And secondly, I wondered what role restitution might have played in the allocation of development aid from Germany, Western Germany and Eastern Germany in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. So was restitution maybe like something like a pressure tool or something in that? Thank you.
To the first question, you have to ask me again in 6 months. So I saw the files, I copied all of the files, but I haven't read them all. There were at least 2 requests, one from Iraq, and they started to negotiate that at the end of the 80s, but then the unification took place and it ended. And I have rumors on the German side that the museum in Leipzig gave back 2 masks and they ended up in the art market. But that is a rumor on the West German side and I have no proof for that. Even if I think I have 6 directors from the Germans, the West Germany, who everyone repeated the same story, but there's no proof yet. Maybe I will find that, I will go to Leipzig to look for that, but it's too early to answer that in general. For me, as a first impression, it was surprisingly that Eastern Germany was also quite defensive in these things. I expected that they would be more open, at least to the socialist states in Africa, for example. But that doesn't seem to be the case. But ask me later. The role of restitution in the development aid is quite simple, didn't play any role. These projects were simply to educate and to train people in these countries. And as far as I was found there was quite a strong hierarchy in there on the other side, because the German side paid for all of that, so the other side was not really able to have any agency to promote restitutions in these projects.
Next, I think I saw more hands. whoever was first, I think he or she was first. Yeah. She could come up a little bit. We don't reach that far.
From what I understood from your talk about how to create new forms of contact zones, is that it's currently rather difficult to do research due to financial insecurities. And I was wondering if there are new ways in which research could be done by trying to seek other financial means, since the Flemish government is cutting back on several budgets. I was wondering how the Africa Museum was going to deal with it.
Yes, Belgium is a very strange country, so I don't know if the question comes from somebody from Belgium, but the Royal Museum of Central Africa is a federal institute, so it's a Belgian museum, and so we can't ask money from the Flemish government. So, but we're trying to ask Belgian money. But this is all based on individual effort. So there's no structural investment in provinces. So there's no in the museum. There's no section for province research, for example. This is in existence. And in Germany, I heard that they had plans. They already started with 5 researchers that do nothing but performance research.
I think you're talking about the museum in Berlin.
Yes, and also Stuttgart as well, I think. There's somewhat specifically on province research.
The German Museum started to do that, but mainly on short terms, so 1, 2, maybe 3 years, and Berlin has now 5 permanent. And but I think 2 permanent people who...
But these questions were, of course, inexistent 20 years ago. 20 years ago, nobody talked about restitution and provenance research in Belgium. So there was an ethnographic department in Belgium.
I have another finger. Another question, and probably more, so... Yeah. Sorry for the running.
Yeah, I wondered whether in your arrival research you also came up of the meeting of the European countries, Europe of the 9 and then Europe of the 11, that met in 1978 and then again 1982, and where they were discussing the view concerning the UNESCO 1973 convention. And because in the Dutch archives I also found the German position at that time, and as well as the Belgian position and the UK position, and I think that there was much more coordination between the different European countries concerning this whole issue of restitution than we from a museum perspective are aware of. So politically there was talk about restitution, but especially how to prevent it. And it raised to a lot of controversies, especially with Greece and Italy, of course, but also related to the colonies. And I wondered whether you have found something about it in your archival research.
The specialist on this question is on your right. So Sarah van Berlen, I think she might talk about it later on. So the debate was launched in the 1970s, and Sarah did a lot of research on that. But it was, as already explained, a tactic to avoid restitution.
On the German side, would agree it was a tactic to avoid that, but from the German perspective, this was also something to do something against their own insecurity, how to deal with that. So they were looking how did other European countries do that, how did they deal with these things. The German position was not to be in the first line. So they always try to force other countries to be more active in that, because they argued that they had quite a short colonial period, that colonial politics was never important for Germany, and so it was not the role of Germany to restitute something and to force, for example, France or England to do the same. So they waited what the other would do and tried to find out more about that. But I would like to ask you later on if you have protocols or something like that, because I have a lot of files where they mention these kind of talks and what several people think about these talks, but I don't have a protocol or something like that, so that would be interesting.
Right in front here, but maybe there is not yet. Yeah, please.
I have two small questions with regard to the project of Jean-Claude's. I'm not quite sure if you will be able to answer them, but I will just drop them anyway. Because I was interested in the notion of restitution, of the Restitution de connaissance. Because of course, restitution debates, it's often not only a struggle about the object, but also about knowledge. And so this idea of Restitution de connaissance sounds to me like a very one-directional. Like I was wondering how this related to the notion of co-creation that was also quite present in Jean-Claude's presentation. That was one question. The second question was because you were talking about like global exhibitions and about really like kind of community projects, which remind me of like a plea for socialization that is present in the report by Sarah and Savoy. And I was wondering how this related to, because it's a project together with the museum institution, so I was wondering how this relates to the conservation ethics of the institution.
Well, I'm unable to answer the question. What Hannelore did was mainly focusing on photography, and so this is easily restituted. Just make scans, you print on a piece of paper, and you start an interview. And this generates a lot of oral tradition. And so there you see how museum collections can activate local expertise. And this local expertise can then be exhibited in àFaradje, but also in Ghent. I think this opens lots of possibilities.
Anybody? We still have a bit of time left. Yeah.
I have a question for Lars, which is to do with the fact that if you think of the principles that we're now looking at in regard to return, we're often referring to the Washington principles and the restitution questions, the agreements that followed 1998. So to what extent, and because I haven't read the literature and the exam to what extent is, in a sense, let's say, European openness or preparedness to address these issues now, part of their preparedness to address those issues? And were any of those issues part of the debate insofar as you see in the 1970s? So the commonality of, let's say, involuntary separation during the Second World War in Europe and involuntary separation in different parts of the world as a consequence of European forces.
I'm not sure I really get the question. I think there were no talks about these kind of things in the 70s. There now, and I think it's really necessary to have a framework to work with, like the Washington Principles. The problem that I see now, or the positive thing is that I see now that different museums develop these kind of framework, or different European countries develop these kind of frameworks. But for a person in Cameroon or Namibia or anywhere else, it's quite difficult because they have to know in which country and which museum there are objects, and if they have these kind of frameworks and so on, and I think it would be necessary to have something on an international level, or at least on a European level, but I also see that it's quite problematic. It was quite difficult to do that with the Washington principles for S-related objects. It's much more complicated to do it for the colonial times, but at least a statement on a European level for an openness to a dialogue and some structures who is to address and so on would be quite helpful. So that's what was really the answer to your question.
I think so in that there's no reference to that being an example that people could address.
Yeah.
So Europe, in a sense, wasn't addressing its own historical differences, and therefore it didn't project forward, which is what's happened in the last 20 years.
Okay, we could wrap up, but I could also allow another question easily. I mean, if anybody has, yeah, I see up there. Or maybe, well, it's closely.
Last question, maybe. I was wondering about the provenance research. That many museums mention provenance as being something done extra, and I wonder if it's a kind of strategy to avoid the issues. Because I think that provenance research is the basic act of a museum, and I wonder how you can do research on your collections without provenance research. And why wait for the money to come in, since it's your duty to do it, it's part of your job.
Oops.
Nothing to do with my paper, but I coordinate a provenance research project that combines 5 different collections in 5 different times, and so we try to enter in these debates. I think there's a point that the museums don't have money to do that. In small or middle-sized museums, you have one curator who is responsible for nearly the whole world, or objects from the whole world. And for him or her, it is quite complicated to do these kinds of research. And maybe it is an excuse to say we do need more provenance research to address these topics of restitution and so on, and to avoid these questions. But I also think it's necessary to do, not to say we need more provenance research and then we talk about restitutions, or like other people say, first of all we have to restitute something and then we have to enter into a dialogue about the provenance research. We try to do that in cooperation with countries in Africa, so we invite people from Cameroon, Namibia and Tanzania, and PNG. And there we also learned that we have a lot of material about the provenance of these objects, but a lot of this material is simply wrong. So, 2 short stories. We have one object where there's information when it was sold in Africa that everything was legal and so on. And the person from Cameroon explained to us that this would be an object that was never be sold in Africa because it is a religious object, and so nobody would ever sell that. So we have the information, it was sold there and it's wrong. We have the opposite case, that we bought a small statue, and we have the information that it was acquired during a raid in also Cameroon. And through the research with our partners in Cameroon, we learned that this is a fake story, and someone made it up just to sell it to a higher price, because an object that was acquired on a raid is more expensive than an object that was bought on a market and so on. So that are things that you can't do just in one museum with one person for the whole world. So you need cooperation, and you need a lot of finance, a lot of money to finance these kind of research. So that's also the point that in money, projects, people, and so on.
Yes, I also think there's a difference between research, because we know a lot about collections, and then there's politics. And politics makes the decision on restitution. I have no say in that. So.
That's satisfying for now. We can argue over lunch. Fight. I don't know, Maarten, do you want to add something? You can.
Yes, if you want to ask why don't you restitute the collections, then you have to address the
Well, I'm not
Minister
talking
of...
about restitution.
No,
I understand the point with restitution, which is a political thing, a moral issue too. But doing the provenance research, that is something else. I think that you should do anyway.
In Tervuren, for example, we have 120,000 ethnographical objects. And so I did research, for example, on one object that comes from Boma. That was collected by Alexandre Delcommune. If you have to read the archives, you have to read the publications the man did, you have to go to Boma to talk with the people. Then you're 6 months further in time, and then you have investigated on one object, so 120,000. So that will take you 60,000 years to...
Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way.
No, that's
Not necessarily.
No, it does work like that.
It doesn't work that way. You do not follow an object.
I think there's a very great misunderstanding of the importance of material culture. Each object is a very important object which is related